Gentlemen, we get the microphones turned back on. Try to be nice. Tell me I'm not. Commissioner Connect. Commissioner Connect.
Commissioner Connect.
You can't turn on your radio.
Attention all commissioners.
Commissioner Connect.
Like my old tough dog, you need a vibrator.
Did you feel that vibration there? At least
Palmer wants to put a shock collar on you.
I showed up on time and I have get the commission. So don't pick on me.
All right, we're going to move on to the Bureau of Wildlife Protection. And before you get started, I just want to say that this past month we had a deputy in Schuylkill County who was attacked. He was injured pretty badly, and we just want to go on record as commissioners as saying that the deputies have our full support. We wish this guy all the best. Hope that his recovery is quick. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. But it goes to show that we've got these people who are deputies who are not full-time employees of the Game Commission who go out and they face some pretty they face some pretty serious situations sometimes, and this is one of those things that we don't want to talk about when a deputy gets injured, but we recognize what they do for the agency and we appreciate the work they do.
Absolutely. It would be a tremendous challenge for our agency to provide an adequate level of service to the public if we didn't have the dedicated deputy force that we do have out there who are willing to do this because of their love for wildlife. So we do wish the deputy a quick and speedy recovery, and thanks to the Pennsylvania State Police and local law enforcement who are spearheading this investigation and made quick apprehension in this case. And that's we can just trust that the justice system will work now, provide justice for the deputy.
And as a result of this, I just want to say, as a result of this incident, we're going to get together with the Committee of Wildlife Protection. We're going to get together with you later on today, and we're going to discuss some things that we might be able to do to help deputies out in the future. It's a shame that we have to wait for an incident like this to happen to make changes, but we need to get on board with what they're doing. So,
yeah.
All right.
Look forward to exploring those options.
Great. Okay, it's yours.
All right. I think. Okay.
Morning, Commissioners. Talking about fluorescent orange changes proposed to the regulations, and as you know, we've been talking about this for a while now. So the last time we had this discussion, the question was asked to the Bureau to what data we had as far as HRSIs, hunting-related shooting incidences, as it relates to spring gobbler hunting. As you know, about 10 years ago, the board changed the regulations for fluorescent orange when hunting spring gobbler, and currently an individual is not required to be in possession or wearing fluorescent orange. So it seemed like a good point of discussion as the board can consider potentially new proposals, new changes, to do an analysis of what impact that regulatory change had on HRSIs for spring gobbler season. So I asked our new Hunter Ed coordinator, Megan Thorpe, to run those numbers and do that analysis, and I'll turn it over to her.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. I've met some of you and I haven't met some others of you, so this is a good opportunity for me to kind of put some faces with some names. So I'm gonna pass these around if you want to go ahead and take one. The handout has some of the graphs and different information that we'll be going over. But if you would like a copy of the entire PowerPoint, feel free to just let me know and I'll go ahead and get that over to you guys. Some of this is going to be information that you maybe already have heard or already have seen, and some of it's probably going to be a little bit new. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. We're going to be talking about spring turkey HRSIs, but just so that everyone's on the same page, hunter-related shooting incidents officially are considered injuries that are the result of a sporting arm, so that's not going to include things like people falling out of tree stands or maybe falling and getting hurt that way while they're hunting. It's also going to be an incident that has only occurred during the act of lawful hunting or trapping, and there's going to be some medical treatment involved. So there's going to be certain incidences that aren't going to be included in this database, but for official reasons, this is what we're looking at. And there's a number of causes that could contribute to this. Sometimes it's just an accident, people falling, having an accidental discharge or a ricochet, stray shots, things along those lines. We're really going to be focusing in on visibility-related incidents, so that's going to include failure to positively ID your target, and then that's also going to include when the victim's in the line of fire. Both of those are going to have to do with whether or not you can be seen, so they're the ones that we're really focusing in on today here. Throughout the past 100 years or so, we've had a significant drop in the HRSI rate. As you can see, a lot of it has to do with education and outreach and just kind of informing hunters a little bit more and having them take their time and be a little safer. So we have been having a significant decline throughout the last 100 years, and that's going to be comparable to some of the spring turkey incidences that we see. They're also going to be declining. The record high for spring turkey HRSIs is largely in the 90s. We'll look at the data here in a minute, which I've included in your packet. You can really see that that's when a lot of the spiking happened, and that's when the official fluorescent orange requirement went into place, was in the early 90s to kind of address that. Our record lows, however, have been in the last 10 years. That's really when it cut down, and we've seen a significant decline in the number of incidents that are happening during spring turkey. So again, as you can see from the graph here, where the red line is, that's actually where we instituted our orange requirement for spring turkey hunters. So I'm not sure if you can really see my graph up here, but this is going to be the 90s. And that's really when we had a lot of the spiking going on, and that's even after we had the orange requirement. However, once the orange requirement was removed, if you could see that there was a significant decline. We did have kind of an outlier in 2010 when there were a number of different incidences, and that could have been from some certain other factors. I'd heard that it was a late spring, so there were a lot more, or an early spring, so there were a lot more leaves on the trees, and that could have contributed to people not seeing other people in the woods. But it largely decreased there in the late 2000s or 2010. So when we compare that to visibility-related incidences, some of those may have just been a ricochet, an accident, something they weren't expecting, but almost 90% of incidences that are related to spring turkey HRSIs, it was due to visibility issues. Whether that be a person was in the line of fire and they weren't seen, or if they just failed to identify their target properly before taking a shot. And I think this is a good one to kind of see how dramatically those numbers did drop after the requirement was removed. Again, there was that outlier in 2010, but 13, 14, 15, and this year, actually, 2018, there was only one incident each spring. And in one of those years, it wasn't a visibility-related issue. I'm not really sure what it was offhand, but it wasn't visibility issues. And that's just kind of going over what I just was talking about. I think it's really interesting to note if you're looking at the averages. Now these are totals, but the average before the orange requirement was removed was about 9 incidences every year, and 8 out of those 9 incidences were visibility-related issues. After the requirement was removed, we actually saw that number got cut in half, basically. So now there's 4.9 on average incidences a year, and 4.2 of those incidences are visibility related. So that didn't really change. Visibility has dominated the cause for these incidences, but we did cut the number of incidents. Yes.
Did you weight these with the number of, say, spring turkey hunters that were out? Because, you know, if you got
I
a
did
million
not,
people
no.
out and 10,000, that'll affect
That's not
the
an
numbers.
incidence rate
Right,
versus.
exactly.
Of course, they don't have tags, so they don't know how many are out.
Yeah, just being safe.
This is a little bit different, just visual-wise, but I thought it was kind of interesting to note people were really wearing the same thing regardless of the requirement that were involved in incidents. If before the requirement was removed, like 12% or 12 incidences they were wearing orange basically, and after that, that number didn't really change. Those people that were wearing orange, now they wear a different color, and the people that were wearing camo illegally beforehand are still wearing camo. So who was wearing what color didn't really change throughout that time. The number definitely changed. And I think that really kind of just shows that we don't think it was necessarily the fluorescent orange requirement that had an impact on these incidents. It was more likely probably awareness. People are more aware that there are other turkey hunters out there and maybe they're not wearing orange. So they're more likely to positively ID their target. There's also been we've done a lot of outreach and education, and I think that has contributed quite significantly, just as it has with the overall rate throughout the year. So that would be kind of the information that I have for you guys. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I have a comment. So, you know, I lived through the change, of course, when we dropped the orange requirement. But if you weren't around to know this, but if you think about it, National Wild Turkey Federation and other groups did not want to be wearing orange. They managed to, you know, convince us that we didn't need orange. But they picked up a lot of the ball on the education effort beyond our normal hunter education. Because in hunter education, your normal student is still an 11-year-old, okay? And so they were able to reach older hunters and explain, you know, and they even came out with stickers and stuff to put all over your gun, you know, look for the beard, all these. So it wasn't just, there were two things that happened at once. One was a reduction in fluorescent orange. The other was a huge increase in the education and outreach of existing hunters. And so to be able to say which one, you know, created what, but that, I think if we were to do that across the board, we still need to reach out to older hunters. I mean, it's always good to say, well, you know, do it in Hunter Ag. Well, God, we already do all this in Hunter Ag. We always talk about, you know, what are the orange requirements and making sure you identify your target. It's the people that are out of that group now that we're going to have to reach if we decide we're going to reduce the orange requirement. So just make sure that we follow that other, you know, that other path and say, if we reduce orange, we increase education.
My question would be, what were the demographics of the incidents? In other words, was it the youth that were more involved, or was it the senior hunter that was more involved in the shooting incident?
I didn't necessarily look at the age of the individuals that were involved. I can go back and look at some of those numbers for you, but
That would be
offhand,
something,
I don't know.
because then you'd know where you needed to focus your attention as to who's creating the problem. I get this is great stuff, but you know, who's involved, and dig a little deeper into what's going on, and that way we know where we need to look at.
Yeah,
I
anyway,
will say the majority, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I will say the majority of our incidences are adults. It's generally not the kids that we have that are involved in these, but so far as spring turkey is concerned, I don't know.
I agree with Jim. I mean, education, I think, is one of the things we need to get out. Even when we talked about the tree stand restraints, you know, as opposed to regulating that, we wanted to do an education program, and we did. I mean, you go to the game lands, and those posters are up in all the parking areas. So, I mean, we've done a good job, I think, reaching that, and I think it wouldn't be much more difficult to create some kind of an information or education packet to go along with this change.
You might also want to weight these by the number, because we look at turkey hunter numbers have climbed, which, you know, I think it is, you know, the hunt safely green stickers that people put on their guns to the identify your target that National Wild Turkey Federation,
Look
those
for the
things
beard,
really,
yeah.
it really shows that how that outreach, really, and marketing really of hunter
It costs
safety
us
works.
nothing to make stickers to put on something you got.
NWTF already has them, yeah.
Well, I mean, let's get with them, let's
Yeah.
partner with them, let's get them out there.
I agree with Jim, education, Tim, what you said, education, but there is a small piece in my, like, the orange going down is the old mentality when you're young, and now you teach it, but what scares me is somebody doesn't see orange and they're shooting. I mean, it's an iffy shot, they can take that chance shot. So now, they're gonna identify their target, which gets back to education, but, having that orange compounds, we'll waste this shell and see what's out there. Mentality.
Yeah, really. Commissioner Fox, this was your agenda item. Do you have any comments? You have any questions?
Not really. I think we pounded it, we've looked it over. When I look at where we are, I think we have clarified some things. What brought it about initially was a conversation with one of our officers who said when he left his headquarters in the morning, he had 3 different regulations that he had to. Depended on where he went, it depended on whether the guy was carrying a bow or carrying a gun. We knew it was not going to be an easy nut to crack. It had been kicked around before many times, and if we can come up with, you know, some kind of progress, I'd feel better about it.
Right, they always say that if you leave a negotiation, everyone has a little bit of a bitter taste in your mouth. It was a good negotiation. I think we did well with this one because I don't think everyone's completely satisfied with it. Randy's not satisfied at all, and I understand that. But I mean, I think it's one of those things. Again, we can look at in 3 years, 5 years to make sure that if incidents go up, we can make adjustments.
Unfortunately, I was here for this whole mess. And
It's your fault.
I know. And, you know, it was a bit of a weird anomaly in that the traditional spring turkey hunting took place in the northern tier. Between NWTF and our biologists, prior to that spike of 34 incidences, there was a lot of trap and transfer going on. And the turkeys took off like wildfire at home, you know, in the southern range, Washington County, Greene County, Adams County, Franklin County. And all of a sudden, the interest in spring turkey hunting spiked, but they weren't turkey hunters, you know. And I remember guys were walking around in the woods with gum boots on and anything that they had that was green, no camo, and they were hunting turkeys like pheasants. And that's when we had that spike in incidences. And, you know, we tried to work our way through that, and, you know, a lot of that fell off, fortunately. And what you were left with is people who were self-educated, self-taught turkey hunters. And then, you know, the incident rate began to fall. But it was just one of those weird things where, like, overnight, there were a lot of turkeys in places that traditionally they had never been. And guys were like, yeehaw, and went out and you know, they were stalking them. I mean, if you sat down in whatever year that is, if you sat down in the woods where I live and you hit a turkey call, you're taking your life in your hands. I mean, it was that bad. And thank goodness, you know, with all the attention and NWTF and stepping up with educational money and a tremendous effort on education, thank God it came down. And I kind of think we're seeing the same thing opposite in the big picture. You know, we're sitting around a table talking about, you know, we don't want to do this because we don't want to make the rifle hunters mad, da-da-da. Well, you know what? There aren't any. You know, we're having the same effect. Same thing that happened in turkey hunting is happening now across the spectrum with everything. we're worried about what rifle hunters think about a decision we make over here, but, you know, what two rifle hunters are we worried about? The two in Washington County or the two up in Jefferson? You know, nobody's out anymore, can't find anybody. So that plays a big role in this thing, but, you know, this is a great report, by the way, thank you. It brings back bad memories. You know, I mean, I remember that year. I remember that year of 34, and it was horrific. And some of the stories were unbelievable. You know, guys got shot and screamed and rolling around on the ground, and a guy pumped two more into them, and 3 more into them. I mean, you think how can that happen? But you know, it was just one of those things. There were turkeys everywhere, and everybody jumped in the game all at once, right? And you know, now we have turkey hunters that know the game, you know, and they're more careful, and probably fewer. I'd like to know how many. Well, you have no way of knowing because, again, I remember asking the question, how many turkey hunters do we have? And it was going to cost like $1.5 million to find out, you know, because everybody got a turkey license, general license, you got a turkey license. So we had no idea how many we had, and we had to get WMI to help us figure out how many turkey hunters, and it was a wild guess. I think it was like 500,000.
No. Yeah, about 240,000 is
40,000.
No, and that, I think with our game take survey, and I'd have to defer to wildlife management, our precision estimate on that's fairly good. I think we actually have a good handle on how many hunters we have now through the game take survey.
And that's where we are today, around 40,000.
No, 240.
243.
240. 240.
240,000.
Anything else? Anyone else?
Well, I have the proposed regulations that we have legal draft up, but before we start, just our current regulatory fluorescent orange structure is basically what has been approved by this board in the past in some way, shape, or form. But there is statutory language, which we've discussed before, that addresses fluorescent orange requirements in Title 34, and that's in Section 25 of 24. And what it says is, unless further restricted by regulations of the Commission, every person hunting for or assisting to hunt for deer, bear, or woodchucks shall wear either a minimum of 250 square inches of daylight fluorescent orange colored material on the back and front combined, or in lieu thereof, a hat of the same color. So deer, bear hunting, and groundhog, all you need by statutory law is an orange hat. So there are the statutory language is outdated, and it's not up to speed with current hunting seasons, and so at some point in time we drafted regulatory language to further clarify and define the fluorescent orange requirements for the various hunting seasons. So what I have here is, this is the actual regulatory language. Now, what you're going to see on this first handout is, this is actually our existing fluorescent orange regulations, but the struck out language is what we've removed for this proposal. So this is exactly what we have in place today, and the proposal would be the struck out language. The second handout that I'm going to pass out, this is what is in our existing fluorescent orange requirements as depicted in the current Hunting and Trapping Digest. Okay. Fluorescent orange is probably one of the most discussed sections of the law since in my tenure in the Bureau, and the goal of simplifying it has certainly been discussed often. And I think this proposal does that. What the board has to determine is if this proposal strikes that balance between safety and simplification of the regulations. The final handout is what the hunting digest will look like this coming year if these regulations are approved as drafted.
What do you think, Charlie?
There we go.
So, rather than go down through the actual regulation, it's probably just as simple to look at this single handout sheet. And if we go down through that, you'll see for deer, bear, or elk firearm seasons, a minimum of 250 square inches of daylight fluorescent orange material on the head, chest, and back combined, visible in a 360-degree arc at all times when hunting for deer, bear, or elk in a firearms season, or when hunting coyote during daylight hours of any deer, bear, or elk firearm season. That is no change from what our existing regulations call for. The next category would be small game, minimum of 250 square inches of daylight fluorescent orange material, head, chest, and back combined, visible 360-degree arc. That is also no change from our existing fluorescent orange requirements for small game hunting. Woodchuck hat made of solid fluorescent orange material worn on the head at all times while hunting woodchucks. That is no change from our existing fluorescent orange regulations. So where are all these changes? Well, if you look at the final category there, other game or hunting seasons, highly recommended. And there's a comment there about hunter education. The use of fluorescent orange colored material having resulted in significant reductions in hunting-related shooting incidents over the years. Hunters encouraged to wear fluorescent orange during all hunting activities, but there is no legal requirement to wear daylight fluorescent orange material when hunting the following: crows, no change; doves, no change; waterfowl, no change; deer during the archery season, which there is a change there, because during the archery season, specifically during some of the overlaps, there have been fluorescent orange requirements for deer hunters while archery hunting, and those would have been eliminated. The late December flintlock season, no change. Turkey in the spring, no change. Fall season, that's a big change. There would be no fluorescent orange requirement for fall turkey of any type. Bear in the archery bear season, there's a change there. Or fur bearers except coyotes during a deer, bear, or elk firearm season. So the regulations that we have drafted and that you've been provided a copy of pretty much mirrors what this final handout sheet is. And also you saw there was no mention of fluorescent orange being required to be posted around a blind, which is typically have been a requirement during a deer firearm season or a deer, bear, or elk firearm season, and now that's been eliminated as well. So simplification, I believe, has been achieved. And now comes the inevitable discussion.
I don't understand with your small game, and I understand that, turkey is a big game species. So now all of a sudden the fall turkey hunter doesn't even need to wear the hat, anything, which really makes no sense, given that they're out there with rifles in Pennsylvania. Most states don't allow rifles, we do. So a simple addition would be small game and fall turkey to wear a hat. I mean, that's kind of where I think Charlie wanted to be, is make sure you always have a hat. And it's really what the legislative language talks about, is at least a hat. I can't understand why we wouldn't still require that for fall turkey. And I guess the other thing is when we talk in the first part about deer, bear, and elk firearm season, a muzzle loader is still a firearm. It's not clear what that really means. Now, there is an exception down below about, the flintlock season after Christmas or whatever. I think we need to be more clear as to whether, are we talking a firearm includes muzzle loaders or a firearm doesn't include muzzle loaders? Just to be clear in our definitions.
Or inlines.
Yeah, either way. But
Right.
that's a type of a muzzle loader.
Right, the early October week-long muzzleloader season, yes, they would have to have fluorescent.
Well,
lights
it's
there.
really
Doesn't say
not
that,
clear
though.
here from that.
But not the archery.
That's a
hunter.
firearm season as well.
Correct.
It is,
As
it's an
proposed.
inline
Right.
firearm.
It's a firearm season.
But down here, there's an exception when you get into the,
In the
after
late
Christmas
season,
one.
in
But
the
it's
late
not
season.
clear. Well, let's
Yeah.
just make it clear.
And I think the existing language in the digest does make that clear. Yeah, so that's not an issue.
How do others feel about fall turkey? I just can't believe that we're gonna go from 250 square inches to none.
I want to echo that same question. That's the question. I mean, I don't remember how we got from rifles in the northern tier for fall turkey to statewide rifles for fall turkey. Randy, can you refresh my memory?
Rifles have always been, in my tenure, rifles have always been permitted.
Well, if you remember when we brought the southern tier in for fall turkey hunting, it was in the 90s, it was shotguns only.
Well, what if we removed rifles from that season?
That's the discussion that I'd like to throw on the table.
Charlie has always been in favor of getting rifles out of that
Well,
season.
I am too.
It's simply, it's more a sniper than a hunter.
Right.
Exactly, Charlie. And they're sniping you.
Do you remember that, Randy?
I do not. I came on in 1995 in the training academy.
That would be
so
right about the
might have
time.
been Right about the time that.
There was no fall turkey season in the southern tier, and when we brought it in, it was shotguns only, and shot size was limited. And I don't recall how we got to rifles statewide and when that happened. But, yeah, there are center fire rifles involved statewide in fall turkey. And I'm not interested in wearing or requiring people to wear blaze orange for fall turkey hunting. And I think we ought to approach it the other way. I think we ought to run it up the flagpole about getting rid of rifles in fall turkey season.
You're exactly right. I mean, the NWTF, I mean, they're all about shotgun and there's no sport in shooting a turkey at 500 yards with a 30-06.
But the NRA.
You would get an argument there from people that are doing it.
I know, Brian.
But back in the day, there were a lot of people that did it.
Right.
And I don't think there's that many
not there, no, it's
anymore. No.
It's actually it's a credo among turkey. You carry a rifle, you're ostracized. In my area.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're north central.
Right.
I agree. I mean, back in the day, I mean, people had turkey rifles, they had, 2 18Bs.
For the over and under, 22 Magnum on top, 20 gauge on the bottom.
Right, and that has kind of gone away.
It's completely gone out of the turkey community, in my opinion.
I mean,
North Central.
I'd like to run it up the flagpole and see what folks have to say.
All right, so maybe before we remove the rifle for that turkey season, would you, again, Charlie, this is your thing, so would you object to, in the woodcock, or in the woodchuck section, making it woodchuck and fall turkey hat?
No, I don't have a problem with that.
Would you be all right with that?
If you want to do that while moving,
Well, and Commissioner Daley has a good point, is that
I do, I got a problem with that.
moving or not, I mean, if you're hunting with rifles,
Yeah.
you're looking at, again, 300 yards. He thinks he can shoot a turkey at 300 yards, but
Really, Winchester was a turkey down? Yeah, it certainly would.
I don't know, what's everyone else thinking?
I'm not interested in any blaze orange for turkey hunters in the fall.
Me either, Tim.
I'd like to have a discussion. I don't know how people feel, but I'd like to have a discussion about removing center fire rifles from the fall turkey season. Shotguns only. Fall turkey hunting, shotguns only.
Well, and that's well and good, but I don't know that's gonna happen for this season.
I understand.
So for this season, why don't we?
And fluorescent
Again.
orange should not be the driver for that.
Right. It
We're
should not
talking
be the
about
driver.
fluorescent orange right now, so
let's discuss what's needed fluorescent orange wise in various seasons.
Okay, I don't see any evidence that says that we need that right now. I don't see any incidents that requires us to make that move at this point. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Steve, you have any input?
I don't. I mean, I'm trying to think back over the past 5 years. I can recall 1 or 2 incidences in that fall season. And if I recall correctly, in both cases, it was somebody using a rifle. I think, Randy, you might remember it was a felon who was not to permit as well. And it was a fatality. But that's the only incident I can recall off the top of my head. Fall.
How many fall turkey hunters do we have?
240,000.
No. I think it's less than that.
Yeah, I can get you that number off the game take. I do know it's declined pretty significantly.
Yeah, I think it's a smaller number, a lot
It's
smaller.
a smaller number.
In the 240, but I think it's still like 150 or 170.
So, I mean, if you're interested in hearing my opinion, I'd be willing to.
That's what you're
share
here
it.
for.
we are.
We know what your opinion is. You wanna see this back in the club.
No, quite honestly, no, you're wrong on that. I actually don't. I mean, if there's one area of regulations that could clearly need to be cleaned up, simplified, not only for the hunters, but for our officers as well, this is one of them. But I do have a concern about the removal of any orange for the fall, in lieu of the fact that we do allow rifles to be used out there. That's.
Well, the rifle is driving it.
I've been on, I was in the field for 11 years. I was fortunately not involved in too many hunting-related shooting incident investigations while I was out there, but one that clearly sticks out in my mind was a fatal, where a gentleman was not wearing any fluorescent orange and was shot by a 30-30 rifle by somebody. And, you know, I've heard it said that, you know, there's no excuse for pulling the trigger on something when you can't identify your target, and I agree with that 100%. But these hunting-related shooting incidents, most of these, the people actually believe that what they're shooting at is what they're shooting at. Right. It's unfortunate, but in that particular case, the individual was wearing a black quilted jacket, and it opened up here, and he had red, white, and blue flannel shirt underneath, and he had no orange on. And one of the factors that plays a huge role in somebody getting shot is elevation, too, because in this particular case, hunter with a rifle who was fall turkey hunting went across a flat, allegedly flushed a flock of turkeys who flew off the edge of the flat and down into a hollow. And so he set up in anticipation of a turkey coming up out of that hollow, and turkey didn't come up out of that hollow. What came up out of that hollow was the hunter that had the black quilted jacket and the red, white, and blue, and the first thing the hunter saw when it went was that with that elevation change was he saw the red, white, and blue, and he saw the black. Couldn't see his legs; they were still, you know, below the edge of the bench. So most of these incidents are not because
Probably would have seen an orange hat though.
Are there any
they have
regulations
seen an orange hat.
that we could establish that would have prevented that?
Yeah, an orange hat.
An orange hat.
Orange
first thing
hat,
you would have
and
seen.
that was a fall turkey incident, and if he had an orange hat on his head, the first thing that come up out of that hollow would have been the orange hat. And yes, he still would have had the black, and yes, he still would have had the red, white, and blue, but the first thing to come up, the first thing to be seen on the horizon would have been an orange hat.
And it was a rifle
It was a
involved in that?
30 rifle.
And the distance?
If I recall, 50, 60 yards,
So
something like that.
it probably wouldn't have been a fatality if it were a shotgun.
Comment on orange, Jim, you said, I went and saw the hat, I'm red-green colorblind, I can't see orange in the woods. So you can wear all the hats you want, and I wanna call on the doctor, isn't 17% of males red, green, brown colorblind?
That's correct.
I couldn't see the pointer when you're up there, I knew you were doing it, because I saw, you guys can't, it's pretty common. Guys that are red, green,
So
brown.
then
color.
orange doesn't matter to you?
Orange does, I can't see it.
But for 80-some% of the population, it does.
Well.
Okay?
Yeah, I can't see it.
But we're talking about two issues. We're talking about rifles and fall. We're talking about trying to get this orange thing. We can,
We're not talking about rifles.
well,
We're talking about orange right
well,
now.
we're talking about,
There, we're not changing the rifle right now.
right.
We're talking about the orange right now.
And that's fine. That's fine.
So
I'd
at
like to
least for
have that
right now, the
discussion
orange-
down the road.
Yeah, right.
And right now, there's no incidence data to show that we need to put blazed orange on turkey hunters in the fall. It doesn't exist.
I'm for it.
You just gave the case, so it would have worked. What more do you want?
And the other concern I had, which I'm not familiar with any incidents that have occurred in this scenario. It's possible, I'm sure, but the removal of the orange from around the blind during the rifle seasons. These blinds are very common these days. They're popped up in the middle of the woods. They can be popped up on a moment's notice. It's not like a permanent hut or a structure that everybody who hunts in that area knows that thing's been there for 20 years. These things pop up randomly at any time, and that little bit of orange that's required around a tree within 15 feet of that can go a long way to alerting hunters in the area that are hunting big game with rifles that they see that little bit of orange, at least they know that there's something going on over there that needs to be investigated before I take a shot if a deer runs through that area. You head out to your deer stand in the morning in the dark. A lot of people do. They have a flashlight. They set up, and as dawn starts to break, those blinds, they can be popped up in a moment's notice. And without orange around that blind, you could have a blind certainly within rifle range of you without even knowing that it's there. And if deer runs between the hunter and the blind, and he doesn't know the blind is there, I mean, I think there's some potential issues there, safety issues. But so those are my two concerns, and but pleased to have the opportunity to clean this up. Just want to make sure that we strike that balance.
I think that's a legitimate concern. The blinds, like you said, their popularity is increasing. They're on the ground, and to me, it's going to be a formula for disaster without a orange tag around somewhere.
And you're saying, Randy, just in the deer, rifle, and bear, not turkeys.
Yeah, right. Correct. What the current requirement is for blinds, minimum of 100 square inches, fluorescent orange must be displayed within 15 feet during firearms, deer, bear, and elk seasons.
I'd feel better if in the first paragraph, if firearms were changed to rifle.
Yeah, that's confusing.
You know, if you,
Clarification we talked about.
right. And then down the road, I'd like to have a discussion about rifles statewide for fall turkey. I know that's not the issue today.
Again, the language this is simply digest language. The language that really we need to be concerned with is what is in the regulations. This can be tweaked on the fly at a moment's notice. That's not a problem.
And I think your point about blinds is well taken. It's funny because this year I noticed a lot of hunters, I don't know if it's because of the way they interpret the regulation or not, but if their blind had it was somewhat of a square in the bottom, they actually had 4 bands, kind of off of each corner at 15 feet. So you did see a lot of the use of the orange with the blinds, and it was very visible from a long, long way away. So I agree with you there. And I think you're right. I think we are trying to strike the balance between what we believe is going to provide safety and what is
Simplicity. Right. And I think either of those changes don't change the simplicity issue of this regulation. So, I mean, I personally am not opposed to the hat during the fall turkey season. I don't know what everyone else is thinking.
I am.
Okay, well, there's 8 of us, so.
Well, I mean, I know we're not tying it to the rifle, but if you told me there would be a discussion on that and we would remove it, I definitely don't like it. I can see walking, but when you set up, there's no use hunting turkeys at close range.
Pretty tough to kill a turkey.
Pretty tough to carry a
with a
turkey
shotgun.
with a shotgun with a fluorescent orange hat on.
Well, I mean, we could, and this is why our, these discussions like this are where the orange regulations get, can tend to get to this point.
It's the same discussion that occurred in 1992. It's the same discussion.
Yeah, but we're talking about, I mean, just going from this to a hat. So the fall turkey season right now,
250 square.
No blaze orange.
Fall turkey.
Fall turkey.
250 in most of the state, except for 2B.
In
so
my
it says,
neighborhood,
currently it's
When moving.
when moving.
Yes.
And then stationary, you have to have 100 square inches of material. So, I mean, do we need a hat or do we need the 100 square inches of material?
Well, the hat is 100 generally, that's what we always say. So, but if you had the hat, you're there.
So then what you're saying, because again, I'm not that serious turkey hunter. I've done turkey hunting a couple times, but my guide was really bad and I never got shot.
We know your guy.
Must have had the same guide I did.
You ended up with him because I ditched him.
Said that. I mean, I don't know, would the 100 square inches on a tree sitting next to me be any different than putting it on my head?
Well, I think a lot of critters detect movement, so putting it on the tree kind of helps with movement issues too. So, I mean, you could just.
Would that be a compromise? So if we change the line issue, we kept that in play, and we kept the, when stationary, the 100 square inches, whatever it says. Is it
Still a hat
15
while
feet?
you're moving, right?
Hat while you're moving.
So my question is, you're a fall turkey.
we're going back.
When you're fall turkey hunting,
I'm not liking it.
you're moving along and you're flushing a flock of turkeys and then you're doing what? You're setting up and trying to call them back in?
Exactly.
So while you're moving, you don't need it?
Well,
What
no,
about
while
the
you're
guy
moving,
shooting
you
at
need
the
orange.
turkey that you're flushing,
Yeah, while you're moving, you have to wear your hat.
Right.
But then when you're stationary, usually what most people do is put an orange band in a tree. That's exactly right.
So is this one of those seasons where you readjust your position, or you could readjust your position?
Typically in fall hunting,
No?
maybe a little, but
not as
it's
much.
not like spring hunting, because it's a different game altogether.
But that's the dyed-in-the-wool turkey hunter, Tim. There's also the ones that just happen to be out in the woods hunting something else during the small game season and see a turkey and shoot at it.
Right.
I mean, so that you got a lot of those guys, because it's not a special tag, you don't need a special tag.
Right.
So again, I think you should have some orange while you're moving. We can debate whether it's 250 or a hat. And then you should have some orange near you when you're stationary. Again, because guys can be shooting that, even though that was a short distance, and I know we had a guy shot through an eye in Butler County years ago, and it was only 40 yards with a rifle. Kind of hard to believe that people can shoot people at those distances, but I think that how do you go from 250 to you can be in full camo? And then, having some orange when you're seated to none. I mean, that's what this is doing now. It's saying, you don't need it anytime,
So
just forget it.
if you require the hat and the guy gets himself situated, he takes his hat off and he hangs it up on a tree.
I don't care, as long as it's visible.
Solution solved.
As long as it's visible.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
Now,
While moving.
you have
And
a
then-
problem with that.
Don't make it hard.
Oh, you gotta
All right,
talk
if
about
you're hanging on
moving
this
from
side of the
boundary
tree and I'm on
state.
that side of the tree, I don't see the hat.
If we do it, what if we just simply do a hat while moving? And if the hunter wants to post that when he gets to
Yeah,
the
let it as his
stationary
option.
calling location.
I'm okay with
leave up to the
I'm
hunter.
okay with that, it's the
Hat
hunter's
while
option.
moving.
I'm okay with that. I am too.
All right, we got a consensus.
Just while moving.
This is not a voting meeting.
So it would be, right, so, but I need to adjust this proposal for
Right.
the January meeting,
So
so,
let's do a hat, fall turkey while moving,
okay.
and the 100 square inches for a blind.
Blind, yeah.
On the blind, I have somewhere between 30 and 50 box blinds around where I live. There's only one that has fluorescent orange on it. Now, if the blind's not occupied, does it, in other words, does it have to be occupied, have the requirement in place?
Well, yeah,
Sure, if it's empty, what does
Orange
it
don't
matter?
need to be posted around a blind that's not being used for
Yeah,
current, for hunting.
because a lot of those guys have just bands that they take with them and put up in the tree. I use duct tape, so
Yeah,
I shouldn't say this, but when I take my blind out, my duct tape's still there, so people know where I've been. Is that littering?
That's littering.
I put my blind back there next year. It's actually a reservation. I'm reserving that tree for the next year.
So, hat for fall turkey while moving. And should that be a solid fluorescent orange hat like the requirement for groundhog?
Why can't it be camouflage on it?
Make it,
I'm just saying.
Solid orange, I'm looking at solid orange.
That's your favorite line, I'm
As
just
long as you can come on.
And then for the firearms, deer, bear, and elk seasons, for the blind, 100 square inches posted within.
Probably should say when occupied.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that right now.
It's harder, right?
There's that slippery slope we're starting to slide right down.
Right back
Stop
down.
right
So
there.
let's stop
Stop
right
right there.
Thing off right now. We're still at one page, so we're okay.
I feel a little obligated to give Randy a couple concessions because we did destroy that orange regulation.
Randy, I think you did an outstanding job. I like this.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there's,
It's up to them.
Hunt at your own risk.
And I know guys will hunt private land, although, you know, you can argue statistics that that's where more accidents happen, but there's also more public than private land, so.
Say it again, I'm sorry?
So we're also still recommending, even where we've said, okay, you're not mandated, we're still recommending they use orange. It's up to the discretion of the individual. You know, a lot of guys maybe hunt their own property, you know, but there's caution there because we can show that, you know, more accidents actually occur on private land as compared to public lands, simply because there's more private lands out there. So just because you're on your own piece of property, you think you're by yourself, that's not always the case.
okay, can we put this to rest?
Done.
Good.
Charlie, are you happy?
Don't answer that question.
Yeah, please.
We're done.
We're
done.
What time do you have?
2 pages of one,
I have about 10
makes the gains.
10 to 11?
Took a while to get there, but we're doing better.
Good. I think we ought to put the bicycle one on first, because then we can always split the.
Okay, let's get them on.
Okay. We could have Kyle Stokes interrupt the order. You want to come up and start your presentation? We have lunch.
Where's the donuts?
Got a minute. I wouldn't eat them anyway. I really didn't eat breakfast this morning because last time he had donuts and we didn't eat them. I felt bad.
I'm concerned.
You were saving
No,
room.
but you're blind for a minute and a half.
Well, I wasn't really saving room. I was just trying not to overeat. Which is something I do a lot of anymore.
A lot of discussion, a lot of wrangling, and, yeah.
So no, we're not taking one.
I didn't get breakfast. Do you feel bad for me?
Hell no, you just slept in, you drunk.
Yeah, really.
So different areas.
It was kind of funny when you're like, what time is it? I thought you were room service.
Turkeys in Bradford County.
They were waiting for you.
You
waiting for them.
What was left of the lunch?
I know. Well, that's what Charlie fell asleep one time.
They may shoot
We
you
had one of
out
those
of the
Sunday
tree
sessions.
They're not hunting.
Charlie goes to the hotel, and he takes a nap before we come over. We start at 1 o'clock, so we're here.
The serious turkey.
No, first one's no Charlie. So we start the session, 2 o'clock, no Charlie. Somebody finally calls us at the hotel. He's sleeping. Why didn't you tell me? Well, I didn't know you were gonna go to sleep.
So just by introduction, if I could explain to the commissioners why we had somebody come from the outside in, is that if you watch any of the outdoor programming, there's a ton of money being pumped into marketing for these electric bicycles. To kind of get ahead of the curve, the staff thought it would be good to have an expert who deals with these bikes to come in and at least provide you with information about these bicycles, how they're being used and how they're being marketed, some of the technical points to it. As the commissioners, you get questions from from the public about these electric bikes and their use, you'll at least have some of the technical background on that.
And actually, Brian took one for a ride and wants to buy one.
He does.
Thank you.
Yours will have training wheels.
Extras, yeah, somebody. Sure. Yes, not a problem. Just didn't want to mess this computer up here.
Yes.
Can I just close it? Oh.
And I don't wear fluorescent orange, and I'm not gum.
What difference does it make if it's moving though, really?
It does. Sometimes you have to
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well,
make some moves to
first of all,
relocate.
I'm going to do a brief introduction, a little bit about myself. I am a resident, obviously, of Pennsylvania. I've lived here for 41 of my 40 years. I own a business in Anvil, Swatara Creek Outfitters, Archery Pro Shop. I've run that business for 17 years. Prior to that, I was a graduate of East Stroudsburg University, and I lived in Maryland for 3 years where I taught elementary school education. So when I was 26, I had gone through a couple hip surgeries, having a hip replacement at the age of 27. I moved home, opened my archery retail business. Since then, have had hip replacement 2, 3, 4, and 5. I've had 5 complete total hip surgeries, which has kind of brought me to my research and following the e-bikes and the involvement with those. I was a cyclist. I still am. Still try to do some cycling, but I've been a hunter since the age of 12. So for 32 years, I've bought a hunting license in Pennsylvania. Been an active cyclist since the age of 16. What I want to do today is just a brief overview, kind of condense the laws, what's been happening and transitioning, just give you a little bit of clarity on the different types of motors and models and what the federal government recognizes as standards and Pennsylvania state recognizes as standards. So in saying that, we'll get started. If you could refer to your second page of your presentation package, we'll briefly go through these laws because I think the most important thing is going to be the definition and then the examples of what Pennsylvania recognizes as a legal e-bike. So it started back in 2001, and I know e-bikes have kind of blown up in the last 4 to 5 years, and there's a ton of marketing and advertising, and some of it misleading to the consumer for what they're allowed to use on a federal level and per state. So, I think there needs to be some clarity established, definitely in Pennsylvania, because there's a lot of people buying particular models of bikes that are not even PennDOT legal to be used on the road without a driver's license and everything else. So in 2001, there was the House of Representatives 727 was an amendment to change the Consumer and Product Safety Act. And what they wanted to do there was establish a clear definition of what was considered a pedal assist or a pedalic bicycle. So by 2002, 9 months later, they amended the Consumer and Product Safety Act, and they came up with a clear definition. So if you look at the highlighted portion of page 2 at the top, there's some key things here. They're defining a low-speed electric bicycle as a 2- or 3-wheeled with operable pedals and having a motor capacity of 750 watts, which is the equivalent of 1 horsepower. And the bike cannot go faster than 20 miles per hour on motor power alone. So that definition states that an electric bicycle can be a pedal assist or throttle assist. So what they're doing by establishing those regulations is basically for the consumer to protect them, but more importantly for the manufacturer who's manufacturing the bikes. It's still going to be up to the state to determine how they interpret those guidelines. The maximum speed that these bikes are allowed to be operated at, there is no federal definition for human power and motor power combined. So if I'm capable of riding a regular road bike at 30 miles an hour, I think I would have no problem achieving 30 miles an hour with a motor assisting me. So the only regulation there is the 20 miles per hour with the throttle. And they use a 170-pound individual, and they use a flat surface. So I'm about 170 pounds. So if I go out in your parking lot and I don't pedal and I solely just use my throttle, that bike needs to govern out at 19.8 or 20 miles an hour. Obviously, on varying terrains, it's not going to be that fast. So those are the federal, that's the federal definition. So then, 10 years goes by, and 2013, now Pennsylvania starts looking at amending. So if you would turn to page 3, now it is up to the states to define their own definition of a pedal assist bicycle. So June 13th, there was a bill proposed, 997, to amend Title 75, which is the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code, pertaining to the use and operation of pedal cycles or bicycles with electric assist. In 2014, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania passed House Bill 573, which is also referred to most commonly as Act 154, which has a clear definition of a pedal cycle. So both those bills and both of those laws are attached. They are at the end after page 10 of the presentation. So you'll have full copies of those in the back of your binder. So I just want to read briefly the definition Pennsylvania has adopted. So a pedal cycle with electric assist is a vehicle weighing not more than 100 pounds, has 2 or 3 wheels, not more than 11 inches in diameter, manufactured or assembled with an electric motor system rated not more than 750 watts, and is equipped with operable pedals and capable of speeds not more than 20 miles per hour on a level surface when powered by the motor source only. So the bike can solely be propelled just with a motor. That's Pennsylvania's law. So basically, going off of Act 154, Pennsylvania has no further laws interpreting what a bicycle is. So a bike of 48 volts, 750 watts, by legal definition, is considered a bicycle. So the federal law, state law, they're very similar to one another. A lot of states have adopted laws that are very similar. Some vary slightly, but Pennsylvania is on.
Say that again.
So any bike that is 48 volts or 750 watts that meets these requirements by Pennsylvania law, PennDOT, the bike is considered by definition a bicycle. So when you look at what a bicycle, where it's used, I can actually ride that bike on a sidewalk. That bike is legal to be used on a sidewalk. Now, when it comes to a state level, the state agencies and legislatures have the opportunity to put tighter restrictions of guidelines of where those particular bikes are going to be used. Pathways, parks, state forests, state game lands. Obviously, because there could be some safety hazards, which is basically where we're at now. You're finding a little bit of a trend or an emergence in some new laws being enacted by particular states. If you turn to page 4, there's a little bit of momentum getting established with a 3-tiered system. So essentially what the 3-tiered system is doing, it's allowing for slightly tighter restrictions, classifying the electric bicycle into categories where it would make more sense. For example, you're seeing San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, Boston, New York City. These are by federal definition bicycles, and possibly by state definition bicycles. But then you got people going down sidewalks in New York City with throttle assist, capable of doing 20 miles per hour. So there has been some modifications state by state. But at this point, those are the 10 states that have currently adopted a 3-tiered system. So I'll explain to you a little bit about the classes. So basically, a Class 1 bicycle would be a bicycle such as those, but would not have a throttle. So I have to be pedaling the bike to activate the cadence sensor in the bottom bracket or inside the motor, and that's what propels me. A lot of cities have tightened up the restrictions where it's 10 or 15 miles per hour. You can ride them on the walkways or sidewalks, but the miles per hour is restricted a little bit tighter. A Class 2 bike would be a bicycle exactly which I brought along today, which is right now what Pennsylvania recognizes as a legal bike. So someone without a driver's license who got it revoked has to get to work. They can legally, without a driver's license, as long as they're 16 years old, they can jump on that bicycle and they can ride it anywhere a normal bicycle is allowed to go to commute back and forth from work. When it comes to riding it other places, then that's up to those jurisdictions to dictate that use. So those bikes can have a throttle. So as of right now, I just wanted to have some clarity as what Pennsylvania recognizes. So according to Act 154, Pennsylvania is a Class 2 recognized state. Now, these tiered systems are not in place here in Pennsylvania yet. Will it happen? Possibly. But I try to stay up to date on all the current laws that are changing. And, you can go out on the internet and there's a lot of bogus information. There's a lot of radical information. This is very true and accurate to where we're at right now with bicycle laws. A Class 3 bike is, I don't know that you're going to see this a whole lot. This is a pedal bike solely that could do up to 28 miles per hour. So some of your big name companies like Cannondale, Specialized, Giant, Trek, they have mountain bikes that have, it's making up a huge percentage of sales right now. Primarily in the Austrian and European market is where it started, but now it's coming to the United States. So these would be guys who are just mountain bikers, off-roading. They would not have a throttle. Most of these bikes are cadence sensor, bottom bracket activated. Those bikes could do up to 28 miles per hour by pedaling in an off-road mode, which typically when you're on a trail mountain biking, there's really no speed restrictions other than what you're comfortable with. So you would primarily see Class 1 and Class 2 bikes would be the two most common style bikes used. So I'm going to walk down to my bicycles because I do want to demonstrate the differences between a Class 1 and a Class 2, and I want to speak a little bit. So you'll be looking at page 5 and 6. They're going to kind of coincide with one another. I'll talk about hub motors, where they're located, front or rear, center drive, and the 3 different classes. And I think for demonstration purposes, it'll work better if I can utilize my bikes. So is this hands-free? Okay, so when you're looking at that Class 1 bike, this bicycle, is this on? So inside the bicycle somewhere, there's going to be a cadence sensor, which tells the motor that the individual is pedaling the bike. So I'm going to turn this on real quick. And the cadence sensor on this bike is located down here. So by simply taking this bike and disconnecting the throttle, it is now a Class 1 bicycle. So it would fall under all those regulations. So I'm going to lay the microphone down because I want to pedal the bike. You'll see a little sensor light up. There's a series of magnetic poles in there. As the crank goes by those magnetic poles, it'll fire the motor. So as I'm pedaling the bicycle, and it's going around and around, now it is providing assistance by the motor to the rear hub, but only by pedaling the bike. So there will be no throttle on the bike. So that's a Class 1 bicycle. A Class 2 bicycle, which is what Pennsylvania recognizes, which these are, is throttle activated. So simply, without even pedaling, it does have operable pedals, but I'm not gonna utilize them. I'm gonna hold the bike up, and just like feathering your gas pedal on your car or a motorcycle, there's a thumb throttle here. So I'm gonna slowly increase, which is giving me assistance as I'm riding or coasting. And I can go all the way up to 20 miles an hour with assistance, and then it will govern out and stop at that point. Or I can use a combination of pedaling and throttle at the same time. So that's the difference. I don't have a bike that does 28 miles per hour. When you sell these bikes as a manufacturer, you need to obviously ship them within the Consumer Product Safety Council's and the ACT's regulations. So bikes have to go out, such as these are. There's probably going to be some changes where they're going to have, the bikes will have to be indicated whether they're a Class 1, a Class 2, or a Class 3 bike upon initial sale of the bike. These computers can be backdoored, just like a diesel truck or any other car computer. There are ways to go into them and switch them. I can make this bike go 28 miles per hour in an off-road mode, if I chose to do that. So that's basically the differences in the three classes, and we're going to be looking at, I think it's page 6. So there's front hub, there's rear hub, and there's center drive motors. A front hub bike has a motor located obviously right up here in the front wheel. Front hub bikes are not very common. They are for DIY guys building little kits at home. But basically, you're making the front wheel, it's got to be throttle assist only, because you're not combining the cassette and the derailleur and the crank and the chain in combination with the wheel. The wheel's just solely going to be throttle assist. The most common two bikes that are sold are bikes such as this. This is a rear hub bike, so the motor is located in the back of the bike. It is tripped by the cadence sensor, and the primary difference between this style and a center drive is when the motor is getting power, it's getting all 48 volts. It has no torque sensor, so it doesn't know anything other than when you ask for power, it's going to provide 100% of the 48 volts. There is levels of assist. Typically, bikes will have 1 through 5 or 1 through 8, which will vary that intensity to the rear motor. Rear motor bikes are not quite as strong torque-wise. They are a little bit less expensive on the consumer end. A center drive bike, which is gained a lot of popularity for outdoor use. The motor is located directly in the bottom bracket. So these motors are pretty heavy. So these bikes typically, an average bicycle will weigh 20 to 40 pounds. These electric bikes typically weigh 45 to 65 pounds. You've got a 7-pound battery, you've got a 7 to 8, 9-pound motor, which adds a lot of weight. The fat tire bikes are predominantly used for outdoors, just for flotation and traction in snow and mud and whatnot. But the center drive bike works a little bit differently. So when you're pedaling this bike, it has a torque sensor in the bottom bracket. So it will give you the amount of power that you need. It can tell if I'm pushing hard on the pedal, or I'm going up a hill, or if I'm just cruising along pushing lightly. So it will regulate the amount of power that's getting put to the motor. So typically the range that you would get out of a bicycle like this, if I'm solely pedaling it without the throttle, I can get about 75 miles out of that battery. On these bikes, you're looking at 35 to 45 miles going off of the rear hub. So those are the primary differences in a front hub, a rear hub, and obviously a center drive. These two being the most popular in the United States. And hopefully we have a little bit of time. We'll allow some of you to take a spin on them, and you'll be able to see how they work a little bit better when you're actually utilizing them. Is there any questions at this point?
Are these real popular in other countries?
So yeah, it basically blew up in Europe. They have slightly tighter regulations. A lot of them are 250 watt, 350 watt, and they are pedal bikes. They don't have throttles. It's been popular over there. It's obviously gaining popularity here. They've obviously been here for the last 18 years, but there's been a pretty big surge of excitement. I mean, I can charge a battery like this to get 50 to 80 miles out of for about 15, 25 cents. So the green energy, people that are RVing, people that live in cities, people that can't afford a car, there's a lot of uses for electric bicycles. Obviously, my application is using it, as a mobile device to be able to get in, to hunt where I've typically been hunting. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how I got to the point where I'm using an electric bicycle to aid my hunting. So obviously from running my archery shop, I do have several Pennsylvania Game Commission employees that are customers of mine, Dave Mitchell being one of them. Obviously, a lot of the guys that come to my shop know a lot of the hip surgeries and stuff that I've gone through in the last 15 years. And I've always utilized a typical pedal bike to hunt. I've been hunting in the woods anywhere from 3 to 7 miles with a pedal bike, even with 1, 2, and 3 hip replacements. Typically, when I'm going in to hunt, I'll be hunting the whole entire day because I'm hunting in big woods. So that means I have rubber boots, I have clothing, I have tree stands, I have sticks, I have food for the day, I have extra water, I have tools to fix my bike if it breaks. When you add all that up and you're pedaling that in 6 or 7 miles, it takes you 45 minutes to an hour. You've typically got 75 to 100 pounds of gear. Obviously, after my 4th and 5th hip replacement, I had some medical complications that did some more damage to my hips. I had necrosis and metal poisoning, which led to some irreversible damage. So I proposed to, Brian Sheets and Dave, and I just started questioning, hey, what are the opportunities for me to possibly use an electric assist bicycle to do what I've been doing for the last 5, 6, 7 years? So they put me in contact with Chad Eiler, and I basically proposed to him, look, I'm not looking to do anything that I haven't already been doing for the past 7 years. I know, obviously from being a school teacher and following some of the e-bike laws, I was familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was familiar with Title II and the amendments that were made in 2011, and the ability to use other motorized power devices to get to and from a location. So my proposal to him was, I thought, very not asking anything out of the extraordinary. So I do have, as far as I'm aware of, I do have the only permit to legally ride in and out of state game lands on an electric bicycle, as far as I'm aware of. I don't know that anybody else has reached out to the Game Commission to do that. So what I'm basically here today proposing is I'm not trying to lobby for or against these e-bikes. I do think they would be a great mobile device to be on the Game Commission's website. When I started looking at the DCNR's website and the Game Commission's website, and I started doing the research, trying to figure out what I could do except, other than drive my truck into a handicapped parking lot and shoot a deer with a rifle, which I don't do. I'm predominantly a bow hunter. That's what I've done for the last 28 years. I wanted to continue to hunt the way I was previously hunting, and I didn't see anywhere that I could get that information. So I guess from a accessibility standpoint, I think it would be a good idea to have that information available. Because I think there's a lot of hunters that maybe had a knee replacement, have a prosthetic leg, whatever, and they're not having all the abilities afforded to them that possibly could be to go hunt. As far as people using them, I know the DCNR, I hunt up in Tioga State Forest quite a bit. I hunt down here in Stony and State Game Lands 211, a little bit over on 156 between Cornwall and Lancaster. There is a relative amount of traffic with e-bikes, and I think a lot of it's because people are misled. They read stuff on the internet, they interpret the law as, hey, it says it's a bicycle, so it's a bicycle, but they don't know that the access is restricted by state and local agencies. They cannot be classified as a motor vehicle, but they are a motorized vehicle. So signage and terminology, different state guidelines. I think most of them say motorized. I think that's the way most states are stated. So several years ago, I ran into some individuals up in Tioga State Forest, and they were on e-bikes. I was walking, and they had told me that they had talked to the DCNR, and that the DCNR at that point was not really asking questions in depth, primarily I think through HIPAA law violations, and there was no certification available that they would have permits for. So at the time, it seemed like they were just looking the other direction. Now, since then, I think they have, this past spring, I think they have amended some things to allow for pedal assist bikes to be ridden in state forest ground. Which I guess I'm not a lawyer, so there's obviously some things there that are a little tricky because the DCNR allows for it, but is a park ranger, he's not enforcing game laws. So when that individual gets out to a gate, I guess it's up to the WCO how he would interpret the use of a motorized electronic device, to pursue game. So there is a little bit of confusion there. But I mean, what I'm here today is just to explain to you, a little bit about the differences and some benefits that I've found could be beneficial for most just individuals. If you look at I believe it's would be the last page. Page 10. I mean, these are just things that pop into mind when I'm thinking about how they could possibly be beneficial just to be used either for people with disabilities or just hunters in general, if the Game Commission was to make some amendments to access. Obviously, the accessibility to more areas. Small example, I'm up in Tioga. It's the second week of gun season. I'm one of 3 cars in a parking lot. There's 18 miles of power line from me to Morris, and there's 3 of us hunting. And this is a major parking lot on the eastern end of Tioga State Forest. One of the other guys had an e-bike. One of the other guys was from Connecticut, which I've known for a few years. But there's just not a lot of people getting into the woods much over a mile or 2, which is pretty common. I mean, you see a vehicle parked along a road, you can look up in the woods, and there's the guys in orange. So I think accessibility, to be able to get into the woods a little bit deeper, areas that aren't maybe getting hunted where deer numbers are pretty good, because I have no problem finding deer. Obviously talked to a lot of individuals in my pro shop, and they're disgusted. They hunt here and they hunt there and they never see anything. And I saw 26 deer in 3 days, 7 bucks, and I killed one. But I'm putting the effort to go in further. So I know, the hunting opportunities in deep are good. I think it can be helpful getting guys into the woods a little bit further. Making the long distance travel more manageable. Obviously, people are in different amounts of shape. Some people are overweight, some people aren't, some people have disabilities. Just regardless of your age, shape, whatever, it would allow you to get into the woods and go a little bit further than normal. Obviously, having some compliance with the ADA and accessibility issues that pertain to people with disabilities. We all know the hunting population is getting older and older. I'm 44. Most of the hunters I see that come into my pro shop, they're 34 to 70 is what I generally see. I do have some involvement with kids, but we all know those trends that are taking place. So as all of us get older, who are making up 80% of the license sales, we obviously want to keep them in the game as long as possible. Make turkey hunting and make getting a deer out easier. When you're carrying heavy loads, we'll have some time to take the bike out, but I did bring my computer with. I do have some video. These bikes are very capable of pulling a load to 200 to 300 pounds. Obviously on a fire road, or an access trail, you're not gonna be off-roading through deep mud puddles or snow, being able to do that. So when I'm riding in and I need to take tree stands or ground blind or retrieve an animal out of the woods, otherwise would make it very tasking for me with my hip issues. So it allows me to keep hunting like I've always hunted. The other thing that's pretty important, obviously being a mountain biker, fat bikes have gained a lot of popularity in the last 5-6 years. In comparison to a skinny tired bike or even the human imprint of a boot on a size 10 of a guy that weighs 300 pounds, the fat tire bike has large tires, large volume of air, displacing the weight over a big area. So typically, the amount of erosion or debris or shifting of the ground is so minimal, I would argue to say it's probably less intrusive or invasive to the roads than just a human walking through a mud puddle. So I think from an environmental standpoint, they're obviously green energy. There's no gas, there's no leaky oil, there's no four-wheeler, there's no ATV, you're not tearing up trails. The biggest thing for me when I talked to Chad was, you know, he recommended some other things. Hey, would you think about a UTV permit or a four-wheeler permit? And those were kind of out of the question for me. I typically don't want to smell of gas. I typically like riding in stealthy and quiet. My biggest issue was, you know, just taking gear in and coming out. Kind of the argument I had for Chad was, you know, if you're in the woods and you're 8-9 miles back in and you hear a four-wheeler or a UTV, you're going to have a suspicion. You're going to say, what's this guy doing in here? Is he legal? Why is this four-wheeler back in the state forest or state game lands? If I ride by you on that electric bike, I could go past you at 100, 150 yards. You would never know I existed. I would go by your area with undisturbing the animals and the deer and the turkeys and everything that's around you. You wouldn't know I'm there. And, you know, it's just a less invasive type of mobile device to be utilized, you know, in an area where people will be hunting, which I see is a major benefit. Operating costs, you know, not that these bikes are inexpensive. They can range, like I said, anywhere from $1,000 to $4,000, which is a lot, but when you're looking at buying a four-wheeler or a Polaris Ranger or a mule and you need a trailer and you need inspection and you need servicing and I can charge that battery when I'm up at the cabin one time all week for 25 cents, operating costs are pretty effective. And then obviously it gets people out in mood. You know, for me, I hunt for the challenge or I wouldn't be riding in 8-9 miles. I like the scouting. I like shooting my bows. I like hanging tree stands. I look at everything with hunting as a part of hunting. So if getting to and from my hunting location is part of that, it's still something I enjoy, whether it was riding my pedal bike or riding that e-bike. It all, to me, you know, just enhances the experience. Why can't you have fun when you're going to hunt? Those to me are a fun activity. So riding a bike, getting in and out adds to that level of the hunt, and it's a good thing. And they're obviously safe to operate by state guidelines and federal guidelines. So they do fall under the parameters that have been set by the Consumer Product Safety Council, Pennsylvania and PennDOT. So I feel, you know, overall, I feel they could be a good attribute to allow for, and it could cut down maybe on some of the confusion that's out there with people using them right now that are unaware of the laws, and obviously to help, you know, individuals with disabilities access the ground more readily. But that's basically what I had. Again, you know, my experience is come from research and experience in the field, and, you know, I just tried to get as much information compiled together. Obviously, you can keep these presentation packets, and then you can look through that information, and you'll have that on hand as a referral, you know, to go through and just read up on what's current as far as Pennsylvania game law. So that was basically what I had for you, just try to bring everybody up to speed. Any confusion on the bikes, we'll have some more time. We'll allow some of you that want to ride them to be able to jump on them and ride them and ask some more questions. But as pretty much what I have for you guys.
With
Yes,
the
sir.
changes we just made to the ADA regulations, does this fall under?
Yeah, they should be able to use this in place of like a wheelchair, but you still have to use the pedal system. I'd have to get some clarification on that, how that fits.
Chad?
I can clarify this. I'm Chad Iler, by the way.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure what year we spoke, but my guess is it was prior, I'm sure it was, prior to the implementation of the board passing the mobility device permit for state English.
It was.
So when you and I talked, we were only offering ATVs as a alternative or for transport from designated routes on state game land. So I assume at that point, what my division did was issue you a special use permit.
Correct.
Cool. So we treated you right. Since that point, or since that time, the board has passed a state game lands mobility device permit. Which falls within the complete confines of the American with Disabilities Act. So these would be completely legal for state game land use on designated routes and then traverse 100 yards off, so long as you either had a Pennsylvania parking placard, had a note from a doctor, had a disabled person's permit issued by the Pennsylvania Game Commission. The federal ADA, wheelchairs are just a completely different object, a mobility device. You can go anywhere that you want if you're confined to a wheelchair under the federal ADA and under our law as well. Not the same with these. These are a motorized vehicle, so you need that mobility device permit to use them on a designated route on state game lands. And my division issues those. So I don't know if you were up on that or not. I can certainly give you a bunch of applications if you want to take them to your shop.
Okay.
But they are completely legal at this point, if you have that mobility device.
Okay.
So a gentleman like yourself that have had that multiple surgeries and things like that, you get a note from your doctor, you're getting one. You don't even question that. That's where it stands.
So Commissioner Hoover asked that if a guy like his age got a note from his doctor.
I'm not a doctor. So the note from the doctor, I look at and I go,
Legal. Okay. All right. So the old people like Commissioner Hoover can ride an e-bike then. Doctor, will you start passing out? Luckily for us, there's a doctor in the house.
This has really been our first hunting season where we've issued what the board has passed, and we've issued a lot of them.
Have we?
Yeah, they're pretty popular, and I think actually quite a few of them are for e-bikes. So you probably were the only gentleman in the state that had one of those permits at one point, but not anymore.
Okay.
That the board completely changed those to fall within the confines of the federal ADA.
Yes.
Are these things very risky out there on the trails? I mean, have you fallen on them?
Are they
with them?
risky?
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
not any more than a normal bicycle. I mean, obviously, everybody has different abilities on a bicycle. Some people shouldn't be on one, and other people. I mean, I still ride a regular pedal bike. It's one of the few exercises that helps to keep my hips strengthened, helps with the arthritis. So I ride year-round. I try to cycle a few times a week. It does help keep me
But you're riding
stronger.
on primarily
I
trails?
ride on, rails trails, I'll do some off-roading. I mean, obviously you ride within your capabilities. No different than a four-wheeler. You don't go try to do big jumps on a four-wheeler if you have no experience doing big jumps on a four-wheeler. But no, typically they're safe. I mean, you're gonna ride at the leisurely speed of what you think you should be going. They're not any harder than a normal bicycle to handle. The one thing that an electric bike has, typically you will find them with brake inhibitors. So at any point, if you panic and you hit the brakes, it cuts all motor activity. So you can't actually power through your braking. So if you have a panic moment, it kills the motor. So.
How much is a spare battery?
Well, so batteries obviously go by amp hours, and that's how long they're going to run. You'll see batteries that are 9 amp hour, 10 amp hour, 12. Those are 17.5. Obviously, the bigger the amp hour, the more they're going to cost. The battery like that's a $500-600 battery. They'll last about 800 to 1,000 cycles. So, if you figure, when I'm charging my e-bike in a season, I might charge it 6-7 times a year. But in the falls, maybe, 5 or 6 in the spring, a couple in the summer if I'm hanging stands or checking cameras or whatever, scouting. But, I mean, in a year's time, I'm not cycling that battery 25 charges. So you do the math, it's gonna give you some longevity before the battery goes. And typical replacement parts are not super expensive.
But when you're doing your 9-mile trek, do you carry a spare
No,
battery?
there's no need. So, for example, I rode in on the Tioga State Forest. They opened the lower gate, which gets me up the mountain about another 2 miles. When I get to that top gate, for me to get back to the power line where I bow hunt, that's still 4.5 miles from that point. I could ride in on my e-bike, ride out, and I'm still at 92% battery. So I got almost a 10-mile ride in, and I didn't use any battery. Obviously, cold will affect lithium ion. So when you're out in 13, 14 degree weather, some of that will drain the battery. I mean, it's like anything else, lithium ion, you should, charge them where it's warm, store the battery typically where it's warm. It's not going to hurt to leave it out in those cold conditions. But you wouldn't want to leave it in your shed versus your house over the winter. Just because the more you charge it and the more it's exposed to the colder elements, it will deplete the cycling of the battery.
Any other questions? All right.
I'd like to thank everyone for allowing me to give my 2 cents today.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
11:30.
11:30. So we got enough time to go into the elk.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'll have them out for when you guys go on lunch break.
That's the last one before lunch.
Yeah, break at 11:45.
Dave, is this you?
Yep.
This might take longer than 15 minutes, though.
That's why I wanted, we could break him versus keeping him.
Yeah.
We've got 15 minutes.
This might take more than 15 minutes.
We can always come back after.
Mr. Kramer's hangry.
He's hungry. He wants a Snickers bar. Does everybody have a Snickers? What I wanted to do, I know that this had been tabled in September, but I wanted to try to bring the elk guide permit back up one more time. Currently, anybody who wants to hunt elk who doesn't have a license, so if Brian would draw a tag and I wanted to go with him, I would apply on a PGC 12 to an elk guide permit. If I had a business where I had 15 guides working for me who were guiding elk hunters, they would all apply for that license on that PGC 12. And every year you need to take it upon yourself to reapply to get your license. Now that wouldn't matter if I was just hunting with Brian, because he's not going to get tagged again next year. But if I'm a commercial elk guide, who every year that I'm getting that, I need to reapply. And one of the things that we find is the regulation states that it needs to be made through their local game warden and then sent through the chain of command. But these guys, they'll either send them to the regional office, they send them to Harrisburg, they send them to their local game warden. And until we get them approved and everything, it just takes a little bit of time to get it through. And then we have unhappy people. What I was hoping that we could do is legitimatize that commercial elk guide permit. So if you're a commercial elk guide, you would fill out that permit. We could change the regulations that it would be the same as any of our other permits. So every March, they would get an annual renewal. So if I'm an elk guide and I'm hunting every year, guiding every year, in March I get my annual renewal. I can fill it out, send it back in, and they'll have the permit for the following year. So they don't have to wait, and take it upon themselves to go to the website, print out a PGC 12, fill it out, and send it in. That is what the region, most of our complaints come from that. It's just guides wanting to get their permits, they don't understand why they haven't gotten them. Every year in August and September and October, it's just a constant calls and, where's my permit, why don't I have it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if we could change that regulation to make it a commercial elk guide permit where it would become just like all the other permits that we have, that would be a wonderful thing. The other thing that is on the table for discussion, and I'm okay with it either way, is some level of testing to just make sure that these commercial elk guides are familiar with the regulations concerning our elk hunt. Just this year, we had guides coming in who couldn't convert. We send a letter out asking them, everybody who harvests an elk, there's a list of things that they need to do. They have to hang their harvest tag. They have to record the location of kill on their GPS. We have guides who come in, and I understand if you're not with a guide and that you may get confused, but you know, we have these guides that come in, they don't have the coordinates done correctly. We pull up the map on the iPad, they can't find where they were hunting on the map because they don't really know where. I believe we had an instance this year where we had a guide hunting in the wrong zone. We had 2 elk that were killed, 2 guided hunters that killed elk with sublegal calibers. The way we're going to address that next year is with the popularity of the 6.5 Creedmoor. I think a lot of people don't realize that that's a .264 caliber and .277 is what the legal size for elk is. So we're going to call it out in the letter, letting them know that 6.5 caliber rifles are not permissible for elk, and you know that it's .277 and above. I think we can handle that education-wise, but there were still 2 elk guides who had their hunters hunting with sublegal rifles. We had a guide stop by the tent and ask what the definition of an antlerless elk was because he had seen a short spike bull. It's any visible antler is a bull elk. It's different than the 3-inch spike. But he had stopped by and asked because he had seen a short spike and he had a cow hunter and wanted to know if they could kill it. So just as we get those things, it just seems to me that if they had a little bit of testing, and I'm not thinking it has to be incredibly difficult, but just show them that they know how to convert their GPS to decimal degrees like we asked them, some basic map reading type of stuff. I'd be fine with that, but if you think that that's over-regulation, I'm fine with it too. You know, I mean, it's up to the hunter to make sure that who he's hunting with is a reputable guide as well. I mean, I don't go with a guide without checking references and stuff like that. So, but the one thing that the region would really like is just making that commercial elk guide permit an existing permit so they get that automatic renewal mailed out to them every year. That would go a long way to making, I think, everybody, the guides' lives and our officers and our office staffs.
So are we set up now, this just for clarity, are we set up now that an outfitter has a guiding permit and then the people underneath him fall under that permit? Or they each individual has to have their own?
Every individual, if you owned, you know, Tim's Elk Guide service and you employed every one of us as elk guides, we would all have to go fill out a PGC 12, mail it in to our local game warden, get it approved and sent through.
Okay. What about him as Tim?
And Tim would be a guide. He is not an outfitter. He is just a guide, just like we would all have the exact same permit.
Does that make sense?
Does that make sense?
The outfitter to have the same permit as his employee?
I'm not necessarily sure that it does, but
And they're all $25 or $27.
I think they're all $25.
The
Yes.
cost of it, I don't think falls into it. I think the question here is.
Training.
Training, exactly. I mean, and if I want to travel with Tim, even though I'm not a guide, I have to have a guide permit to be involved in the hunt. I think that's where we get hung up.
Right.
And I think we're all on board with the training. I think there's at least a minimum amount that you need to know to be classified as a guide in the state of Pennsylvania. In any other state that offers guide permits, you've got to go through and prove that you're a guide. It can't be just, I've been doing it for 5 years.
Which is what we run into.
Which is what we run into
We're
now.
out there, we're like, I don't live here, but, you know, I come up every year for the last 5 years, and I've been doing this for Joe Blow Outfitter.
Right.
I think we're all on the same page, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong.
Commercially, we are.
The individual who gets a permit or draws an elk tag,
Right.
and he wants his Uncle Joe and Brother Sam, and I don't think we feel that that's even a necessary thing to have that.
And I would defer to Randy or Chad
That actually is a necessary thing to get
because of
around
the law.
statute. Because the statute says you can only participate in the hunt.
Hunt's over though.
Yeah, but you have to watch what the courts of competent jurisdiction are saying on that issue. Because
These guys want somebody to help them drag an elk.
I would be careful about what courts of competent jurisdiction are saying in that issue. There actually is, there's case law Because the term hunt under section 102 is any act or furtherance of the taking or killing of big game. Or excuse me, of game or wildlife. And courts are determining when that actually ends differently. And you can probably have Jason Rao do a little research on that.
And we could split the hair, I guess, all we want, but are we gonna cite somebody are we gonna cite somebody for helping drag Uncle Joe's elk out? And if we are, shame on us.
And
But
right now,
but that goes even further into pheasant hunting. When you take your dog out and take him out to go pheasant hunting, are you not guiding him?
But he has a license.
Right.
It's all about the fact that these other guys don't have elk licenses.
And quite frankly, we have zero issues with Uncle Joe and Cousin Bob. Because they understand, because when we send that initial letter out, they immediately fill out their paperwork. And it's only 1 or 2 or 3 of them, and they mail it in and they get their, Chad issued them the permit. They never complain, they're just happy as can be because they're going hunting with a friend or a family member who has an elk.
What permit are they issued, Dave?
Well, they fill out the exact same paperwork that a commercial guide would. It's a PGC 12, which is their standard application. They fill it out, for elk guide permit. It's $25 and we just ship it back.
Why can't, to me, it seems so easy to say, why can't we just have a permit that says permit to accompany hunter?
Yeah,
non-guide?
let's just issue.
Let's not call him a guide,
Right.
it's crazy.
Let's issue a X number of.
Say they can bring 3 friends with or 2 friends, whatever we decide, permit to accompany. Not a guide.
I'm gonna defer to Chad, that's his.
If you put a guide permit in there, they don't know nothing about guiding.
We're issuing what's in current reg.
I have a question, Dave. These guides, like say a typical elk hunter hires a guide, how many people does this guide have out there for that particular hunter? Is it 5, 10, 20, Are they all over the countryside scouting until they find the right bull?
Some of them are. A lot of it depends on the size. There's some businesses that may have 25 or 30 guides, and they may have 10 or 15 or 20 hunters in camp as well. But as hunters tag out, a lot of times those guides will then go out and look for elk, and they'll look for bulls and stuff like that. And some of them may just have 3 or 4 guides, and each of them gets a hunter. It just depends on what their business model, how
It
it's
seems to
set
me
up.
to make it fair, we should have a limit as to how many guides a hunter can have. If a guy's got 20 guys out there searching around for a big bull, it certainly puts the other people at a major disadvantage as far as looking for a big bull.
If you're paying for a
It's not
guide.
called hunting, it's called, it's called killing when you have 20 people looking for a bull for you to
Well,
shoot.
that's not legal though. They're not allowed to be out looking for a bull and then calling a guy up and go, hey.
But that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening.
Well, but that's something that law enforcement needs to take care of. They know that's going on, and when it happens,
But that's what I'm saying, can't we just can't we say you can only have 5?
How do you regulate that though?
I think it can be regulated,
Isn't the bottom line, though, that we all agree that we should have a commercial license?
Yep.
Right.
And it should have some form of testing that shows that you're, a responsible guide. And that the fee could be higher because we're gonna have more administrative costs in testing these people and whatever. And do what you said, like every year we send them out. So really the hang up we gotta figure out is how do we deal with the family members and the friends that we wanna have accompany.
Change the reg.
Yeah, or do you, when you issue the elk permit, you issue them 6 accompaniment tags or however many we want. And, figure out a way that is now considered the license to accompany the hunter, so that you don't run into this case law stuff that we're all worried about.
So I guess the other thing is, we do change things every year. Like the elk hunt zones changed from last year to this year. So do we need to retest these people every year, or is it just kind of now you send them a refresher? And here are the changes that.
An update or something like that would, because we would know who they are, so
Right.
you could send them an update. And we did include that information along with the tag holders. Like in our general letter, we called out, everybody gets a map with the change to the elk hunt zones. And I don't think we're gonna be changing them a whole lot. That was just a simplification thing. We wanted to use better roads and, so talking to Jeremy, I don't see like a major.
Yeah, but whatever, a little hitch
come along, yeah.
You're just interested in commercial guiding permit for elk only, correct? We're not extending.
We're talking about that right now.
Yeah.
And I really don't think people on the board disagree with the commercial part.
I agree.
It's that non-commercial part that
Yeah.
We're hung up on it.
And I'm sorry, I don't have the answer, because I don't know what to tell you on that.
Something else.
Yeah.
Guest. Guest.
Maybe give it out with your elk tag. I mean, there's so few people get elk tags. You're talking 126.
And it's a one-time deal, right? These people aren't coming out every year.
Right, well, only the commercial ones, but.
Right, no,
yeah.
but we're talking about the guests,
The private, oh, yeah, right, that, I mean, they may never.
One of the things we're gonna have to do is Chad, our attorney, look at this case law that Chad is referring to see exactly what has already been decided upon. We can probably only by looking at that can we decide how.
But as an agency, we could issue that permit if we wanted to for free.
Yes.
And maybe give it out with the elk tag. Give them 10 of them, or whatever number we want to give them. I don't care.
Right, so I mean, it's just that,
That's kind of what I was put in place to be.
Randy's trying to chime in the back.
I'm sorry, I thought.
No, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, you could absolutely issue it for free. I think you do have to go with a permit. I mean, we don't have the authority to make a new license, but we do have the authority to make a new permit. You could absolutely issue that for no cost, and do the commercial guide for the cost. So that, I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
I would make it a permit, because a permit is enforceable under the reg, rather than like a letter of authorization or something like that.
I think we're just hung up on guide.
Right.
The word.
The
We don't
word
wanna
guide,
call,
yeah.
we don't wanna call a 12-year-old kid that's accompanying his dad a guide.
Totally understand that. Then you would need to do something with that, those guiding regulations as they stand to rename that, because currently it's.
Right.
all-
Yeah. Well, good. Any other questions? Well, didn't take as long as I thought.
Well, what about, what about, again, going back to the number of guides an individual hunter can have?
And here's the only concern I have with that. You know, I mean, if you go up to the elk hunt, right? So the guy hires an outfitter, Elk Country Outfitters, right? And he has under his employment 15 people. But they hire, maybe they have 3 people hire them as their guide. So now these 15 or 20 or 40 people are out working. There's no way for the game commission to tie each individual who's riding around. The elk zone's pretty big. Tie them back to a specific hunter. You know what I mean? It would just be very difficult to do. I mean, I don't disagree with you in principle. I think practicality, it would be, I don't know, who to well, you're a law enforcement guy. What do you think?
I think it'd be hard to prove. I mean, I think it'd be.
Especially up there.
Yeah, and
they're just not right.
it's so bad, I mean, they could be turkey hunting.
Right,
Right.
exactly. That type.
They could be
Archery
doing
hunting,
they could be doing they could be out, you know, but the true the true thing they're doing, I mean, you know, they're a licensed elk guide, but they don't have a client. So they're up at camp, so we're gonna go turkey hunting, and oh, by the way, we're gonna be hunting the food plots on game lines 14, and we happen to have a zone 3 bull hunter, and oh, I just saw 7 bulls. I'm gonna go back to camp at lunch and say, hey, there were 7 bulls in food plot 14.
Right.
And the next morning, you guys should be up there.
Right. And we do run into those guys that are driving around looking for elk. And again, that's a hard one to prove, but you know it's happening. You know it's going on.
In industry, you know, and this is kind of a safety issue, it kind of is and kind of isn't, but in industry, you have all these contractors and subcontractors. There's no way that they can make it economic for the company to be responsible for each and every one of those subcontractors. So what industry has done in recent years is that contractor is required to come in and go through a training class, and then he gets signed off on that his work area, that he has knowledge of the dangers and the safety issues and everything in his work area. Then he becomes responsible then for anybody, that site becomes his. They call him a site superintendent. Anybody making a delivery into or out of that site is responsible to that contractor who's been trained by the company, and that contractor had to sign off on it. Now, Charlie brought up the concept that, you know, I totally agree. If we're going to say as an agency, these outfitters have been approved by us, they've gone through a course, they've gone through a class, they're knowledgeable, they know what they're doing, charge a fee, guy goes through a class, then he becomes an outfitter. And the other 27 guys that work for him become guides. But that outfitter's responsible to
Yeah,
train
we can
those
talk a little bit about that. I don't
guides.
know,
I would caution only because I deal with this, and I would caution, watch what you're charging. We went into a deal 15, 20 years ago with nuisance wildlife control operators where we have just that. So now we have a $50 permit, you have the permittee, and then you have people that took the test for $25, and they could have 90 of those people. And the permit is $50 per year for all that work and for all of those people. We lose so much money on those permits. And I don't need to look at a law enforcement issue as a moneymaker, but my gosh, that was a bad deal that we went into. And I would caution not to fall into that with guides either. And there are some entities, I won't mention the business names, but we deal with the big pest control entities out there. And there are some that say, you know what, we don't want to be responsible for employee X. You get your own permit, and you get your own permit, you get your own permit. And then there's, so that costs them a little bit more money, but that way they're not responsible for it at that point. So we have businesses doing both of those out there. But the $50 a year, I mean, they're making that back in 10 minutes on one town hall call. For 100.
yeah, but I don't know that we have to give up the fee to the individuals, but I kind of agree that somebody needs to be responsible for what they do in the field.
When you say the individual, you mean the guide?
Okay, that's something we have to do a reg change on.
I would make that completely clear.
Does it make sense to you? You could say no, I don't get offended.
I think that, yes, it does make sense. Oh, thank you.
I think it does make sense. I think there is some misunderstanding in regards to these guide permits. As Dave said, his and my division get the
Calls from people that literally send
their permit application in, 7 days ago, and they want to know where their permit is now. And the one thing that we tell the guides when they do that is they can, by statute, apply for 1, 2, or 3 year permits. They could apply for elk guide permits for next year right now. It's generally their procrastination that causes the emergency on our end. So I don't know if making it a standard permit will cure that. In other words, where they get a renewal in March, but it may help, and it may be beneficial to model it like the NUCOs. I would just caution that if you're expecting that permittee to be the responsible party, that you clarify that in regulation.
Okay.
I mean, I think that makes sense where if you have a large business owner that has 15 guides working for them. If that outfitter knows that if one of those guys does something wrong, I think he's going to be much more selective. I think he's going to be much more, hey, my business is at stake. Don't do something stupid.
That was a point I wanted to make, and that's what happens in industry. Once you put that responsibility on that contractor and say, this is your site now,
right.
You're responsible. And I'm saying, when Charlie came up with this, is have them called outfitters, and they have to pay a good buck to go through the school, and then they become responsible for all their guides, and then they have to sign off that they trained, and all their guides are trained, but it's their responsibility.
So you're talking about like an outfitter permit as opposed to a guide permit?
Yes.
Two different
things.
So you're gonna cite the outfitter and not the individual guide, that's
Correct.
Or you sign both. Yeah, I was going to say, set them both.
Sign both.
Yeah.
Nobody gets a pass, you sign them.
Right.
Although the western
Right.
states, there's outfitters in Alaska, and
You
you
go
go
to
through
an
an
outfitter
outfitter,
and they have so many
but they're
guides.
responsible for their guides underneath.
Yeah, my guys have always been called wranglers.
Right.
You book a hunt with an outfitter, you hunt with a wrangler.
Right.
And
That wrangler's
I've
responsible.
literally had an outfitter's license removed in New Mexico for what his
What his wrangler
wranglers
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with that. I think that, at some point, you gotta make somebody in charge and somebody, but I would still test the We're forcing,
guides.
forcing the test the guide.
Oh, yeah, because they
We're
still
putting
have
our
to.
name on it.
They still have to fall under the requirements of being able to put the location into
Yeah,
a
they just can't be a
GPS.
business transaction.
Right,
They
no,
gotta
I
go-
agree with
yeah.
that. I
But
don't
we have-
doubt that at all, but I think, I kind of agree with what you and Charlie are saying. Somebody needs to be responsible for these guys out in the field.
Right. And then, once the animal's down, as far as I'm concerned, hunt's over.
Yeah, Chad will say no.
I know.
I think courts will say no.
No, I gotcha.
Some courts are all courts.
Courts of competent jurisdiction, ones that have statewide jurisdiction, not magisterial district.
Key
What would John say?
He'd say hunt's over. He's hunted all his life, hunt's
Well,
over.
how we use our prosecutors,
But that was Jefferson County, so.
how we use our prosecutorial discretion, you're completely sound. I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's just to make it clean and legal.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you.
So nobody can accuse anybody of anything.
And here's the other thing is,
Why do you have to tag the animal?
if there's a violation in the field, right, and it's a result of something that the guide or the guide does, so the guide's responsible, the outfitter's responsible, but the hunter is also responsible.
absolutely.
So that's I mean, there's a
Yeah.
Because the hunter in the end is responsible
Ultimately
for the
responsible.
law.
Right. He's
Right.
And he's the guy who's pulling the trigger.
Right.
You know, so.
So are we saying we're gonna have a
Outfitter.
permit for an outfitter?
Outfitter.
And that outfitter would obviously have to have his guide permit, and all the guys that work for him would also have to have a guide permit.
So, and that goes even further.
And be trained.
because
Be
as-
trained. So the outfitter would have to be,
an outfitter permit,
Right.
and then we'd have guide permits under that.
right.
Correct.
But with a guide, you'd either have to have one permit or both. Can I just be a guide, not an outfitter?
No.
Yeah, no, the guide has to work for an outfitter.
No, guide has
Doesn't
to.
have to be, guide can be an outfitter.
Yeah, he would have to, he would have to
But
sit
he'd have to
out.
have both
Two might be
permits.
the outfitter.
But you have to have both
You have to have
permits.
both permits,
Yeah.
guide and outfitter.
Exactly, that's what I was getting.
Right.
Oh, one last question, does this outfitter have to have any additional training?
Just whatever we give him.
Because they're all,
More than, because his guys are already have an X amount of training.
He's gonna train them.
No,
in order to get that, in order to get a permit for us, they would have to meet requirements that we put out.
For the guides?
Yes.
Or for the outfitter?
For the guide
Both.
and the outfitter.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying pass that responsibility off to the outfitter and make him responsible for training his guides.
Make him responsible for hiring trained guides.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Yeah, I'd be okay with that.
that's
Yeah.
fine.
Charlie's got some.
So then the question grows, I mean, at what point do we, because we're killing a lot of big bucks in the state of Pennsylvania, and we're seeing advertisements now to hunt Pennsylvania through guides, and we don't license those guides.
But if they have a Pennsylvania hunting license, they're
what
not
I'm saying.
required to have
Well, that's
that.
what I'm saying, I said, it's something.
Unless it's
we need
on
to look
state
at.
game lands, they're doing commercial activities on
can't do
state
it.
game lands.
Yeah, they can't do it.
Yeah,
Right,
turkey-
they would have to have.
Turkey hunting too.
But we're gonna end up in that
Right.
boat pretty soon, so we need to take that look at it.
Right,
Charlie has a good one.
yeah.
One
Yes,
of the things that I looked at, it said you're ineligible for a license, a guide license if you had any infraction of the game law. So if I got picked up for no fluorescent orange, I could never have a guide license.
Previous 10 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Well, wear your orange.
What brought it up, the guy said he had been cited for an untagged trap. But that put him in a position where he could not have a guide license. Seemed to me,
So you're thinking it should be a degree of offense, and we have that in the game law, various degrees, maybe there should be some associated degree of offense, right?
I just had that concern.
You can make sure
It
it's
was a very
very
minor
serious
violation, but
offense.
if it's any violation, would make him ineligible for a guide
I
license.
like where this is, I like where this one hit. Don't you?
I don't know, I mean, that's something we could, look at. I don't know that we wanna make it any more complicated than we need to, though. Again, Stan's gonna be calling us up and going, we gotta make this less complicated.
Yeah.
So,
Are you talking about having two schools then? One for outfitters, one for guides?
no, it's gonna be the same course.
Same course.
Gonna be the same course.
Yeah.
There may be some extra legal stuff that you need to include in your outfitter side to make sure that they're well versed on the laws.
When they're responsible for the actions of their guides.
And then they were responsible for the actions of the guide, where they would transfer down to the guide. I mean, what you're saying makes some sense in that we train the outfitter trains the guide, they still have to apply, and maybe they just take the test and send the test in for minimum knowledge or minimal knowledge.
Or an online, or.
Right, that's what I'm saying, you can do it online, do a minimal online test for knowledge, and then we issue them a license, but the outfitter needs to have
Yeah.
a higher level of knowledge.
Right.
I
That's,
mean, that's, you know, I think that's where
that's,
he's
that's
going.
pretty simple.
Yeah, and then we wouldn't have to have, like, that was the biggest complaint from the outfitters, I gotta take my guys off of work, I gotta send them down to the, you know, the region office, they gotta take time off, they gotta go, you know, do this,
That'd be a
that,
one-time thing, though.
It is a one-time thing.
It would be a
yeah.
one-time thing. You get the
Let's
permit,
not cry
and any
about it, you
updates,
know?
they would be sent during their application process and, yeah.
And we can make things easier, we can do it online.
We're getting there.
Test online, yeah,
That's progress.
yeah.
Well, do we wanna make it that easy if we're
Questions,
saying we're
comments?
certified guides? You know?
We'll break for lunch.
Let's eat.
Back here, what time?
Back here?
Yeah, back here.
Back here, when we get here.
You have lunch.
Look,
You each get an apple and an orange.
there's nobody